All right. Well, good evening and welcome to the special meeting of the Federal Way City Council. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to the Federal Way City Council meeting. We've got a study session for Sound Transit Tacoma Dome Link Extension, and this is a briefing. First, we'll have a staff introduction by E.J. Walsh, Deputy Public Works Director. Then we'll have a project briefing. We've got Chelsea Levy here, Government and Community Relations Officer with Sound Transit, and Karen Kitsis, South Corridor Project Development Director. We'll have opportunity for citizen comment, 3 minutes as per usual, and then an opportunity for council discussion and questions. So with that, EJ, please proceed.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of council. Tonight we are here for the special meeting to discuss specifically the Tacoma Link extension. So just as background, this is the next project for Sound Transit. This is extending what will soon be the project to bring light rail to 320th. From that location down to the Tacoma Dome area in Tacoma. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen and Chelsea.
Good evening. Thank you for having us again. So I'm Chelsea Levy. I've been here many times to talk to you about Federal Way Link Extension, which is light rail that will extend from Angle Lake Station in the city of SeaTac down to the Federal Way Transit Center by 2024. Tonight, I am not here to talk about that project. Instead, I wanted to, as EJ said, introduce Karen Kitsis. She's the project director for projects in planning now in South King and Pierce counties, and we wanted to come and provide an introduction to you for a new project. This is the light rail project that will extend from the Federal Way Transit Center down to Tacoma Dome by 2030. So this is really just an introduction for you. We are in the really pre-planning phase of this project, and as you'll see here over the course of our presentation, we will be working very closely with the council and the communities along the alignment, along the corridor over the next 4 to 5 years to select station locations as well as the alignment, but no final decisions for the project have been made at this point. We're really just kicking off the project very shortly here. So with that, I will just hand it over to Karen and we will pull up the presentation. Oh, here we go.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having us here today. As Chelsea mentioned, we are at the start of a 4 to 5 year planning process that will lead to eventual construction of a light rail project down to Tacoma. This project is part of the ST3 ballot measure that was passed last year, which in addition to the ST2 projects that are already in development, leads to, at the build out of this overall system expansion between the two votes, to a light rail system of 116 miles with 37 new stations that extends to the north, the south, and the east of our district with additional lines within the city of Seattle. As you can tell by the slide, we have with all of this together, have plans of ridership approaching 600,000 daily riders or daily boardings by 2040. We also will extend commuter rail, which is particularly important to the South King and Pierce County part of our district, with additional capacity improvements as well as extensions towards DuPont in the later years of our expansion program, which extends for 25 years. We also have ST Express bus improvements that will be in the corridors where we will have rail eventually, as well as additional opportunities for improvements of the operation of those buses with a bus on shoulder program, buses running on the shoulders where feasible. That's a project we're going to work on with WashDOT, as well as other improvements, including bus rapid transit, bus that runs in HOV or express toll lanes and has really rapid service and is branded just for that particular route. So that's an overview of our service, of our service expansion plan, system expansion plan. I'm happy to talk if there are any questions for that, but we're particularly here to talk about the Tacoma Dome project. Just as a reminder, the sub-area equity policy within Sound Transit is built upon that the taxes that are collected in a sub-area, of which we have 5, including South King and Pierce, should benefit that sub-area. So in general terms, that means that money that is raised or taxes that are collected in a sub-area benefit and pay for projects within that sub-area. This shows where our system, our light rail system, is to date. You can take, in the south area, you can take a train to and from Angle Lake and then head north towards SeaTac and other destinations north. The project that y'all have been spending a lot of time with over the last few years is the Federal Way Link Extension. That has the stations you see highlighted here, Kent Des Moines, 272nd, Star Lake, and the Federal Way Transit Center. This project will pick up where that project leaves off, with looking at extending from the Federal Way Transit Center towards South Federal Way Station, and then entering into Pierce County with a station in Fife, East Tacoma, and then at the Tacoma Dome. So just to highlight again, we are here on behalf of Tacoma Dome, the pink reddish line that you see. This is another map of the project area with a little bit more detail. To emphasize again, no final project decisions have been made. The ballot measure that passed in November did a couple of things. One, it funded a project to be built between these areas, and it sets the general location for the stations, meaning there'll be a station, and one more station in City of Federal Way in the South Federal Way area. But exactly how we get between the 2 points, what the profile, meaning whether the alignment is elevated or not, those are elements that we will have to take into more detail, and exactly the station locations through the project development process, similar to how Federal Way advanced over the last several years, ending in a record of decision or a document that states all the particulars of the project, and then it moves forward. And that process takes, again, about 4 to 5 years. The Federal Way, this project will connect Federal Way to Tacoma with a length of 9.7 miles, 4 stations, and approximately 30 to 40,000 daily riders. The cost for this project in 2014 dollars approaches just over $2 billion. Another important element that is needed for this project, but also operation of the entire ST light rail system, is a maintenance facility. There are 2 maintenance facilities programmed in Sound Transit's expansion plan. One is in the North Corridor, and one is along this corridor, meaning that along the corridor from Federal Way to Tacoma, we will need to identify, site, and construct a facility to maintain and store our vehicles that will be used for both this corridor as well as others further north. The representative project, you'll see those words here and other documentation that Sound Transit produces. That term is one we used and continue to use from the ST3 planning. We, for the purposes of developing the ballot measure and then now the implementation plan, had to design a project with limited engineering that would have a cost estimate that would be broad enough to encompass the project that would advance. So we needed to pick a representative alignment and station locations and design in order to have a robust enough cost estimate to carry forward. But that does not mean that we will skip over the important environmental and local process to make those important on-the-ground decisions about the project. One of the elements that's changed with the Federal Transit Administration, which is an important regulatory agency for Sound Transit, is that we can start with the last locally determined planning process and use that as our starting point rather than having to completely recreate the wheel to begin advancement of this project. So that means we'll be starting with the ST3 effort, because that's the last time we had pencils up and we're in a working mode. But that in no means determines the end of the project. It just gives us a place to start to connect the dots, if you will, with the station locations. So we wanted to emphasize that we really are, again, at that starting point. This is the overall project development schedule from now until the opening of revenue service in 2030. The next 5 years are focused on completing the required state and federal environmental process, making sure we have a robust public and elected and stakeholder involvement process that Chelsea's going to speak to, as well as making decisions on projects that can be built based on consensus with the jurisdictions along the corridor that can stand the test of time to development and construction of the project. The lead engineer on this has coined the term durable. He wants us to create durable decisions that are ones that, again, can last, and we're not revisiting decisions over time, especially when you get into the construction phase. It's not when you want to be trying to figure out exactly what you want to do. To that end, there's a couple of three important areas to highlight as far as the schedule goes. As Chelsea mentioned, we really haven't started yet. We're in the process of the consultant procurement. The consultant staff will be the ones with the direction of Sound Transit to complete the technical work and support the outreach component of this project. The Sound Transit Board is scheduled to approve selection of that consultant at our board meeting in December. And the way that our internal processes go, the consultant following the selection in December would have official notice to proceed in January. So that's when we really see the technical work beginning. The other element that was really, I think, advanced by the Federal Way Extension Project where all the cities worked really well together and the jurisdictions worked well together. We are hoping to advance what we're calling a partnering agreement, which is an agreement between Sound Transit and each of the jurisdictions that highlights some basic elements. One, that we're starting with the ST3 representative project, that a maintenance facility will need to be along this corridor, and we'll have the important milestones where we hope to have city concurrence or part of developing the project where we would need to have concurrence from the jurisdictions. We're hoping to bring that partner agreement, work with staff over the rest of this year and bring that before y'all in January, hopefully, as well as our Sound Transit Board at the same time. The other key date is summer of 2019. So the first phase of the consultant work will be about 18 months. And in that process, we will have outreach at all levels that Chelsea will speak to. We will also complete technical work to take the ST3 representative alignment and combine the technical work we'll do with the outreach to determine an alternative that's preferred. And we want to build consensus around that with the jurisdictions as well as Sound Transit Board, so that as we go into the environmental process after 18 months, we're able to carry one primary alternative forward. As an example, in the city of Bellevue, when they advanced Eastlink during the environmental process, they had over 20 alignments that they looked at. That makes it very difficult to make project decisions. So we're hoping to establish a method to work together as we go through this, so that while we may not be able to make one decision on every element at that point, that we have enough understanding about the corridor and enough ability to work both with the jurisdictions and the Sound Transit Board to narrow the areas that will require more detailed work by establishing the process from the start. The rest of the 3 years or so to get to 2022 will be based on completing the environmental documentation, the draft EIS, and the final EIS to get to that record of decision, very similar to the Federal Way Extension Project. After that, the project goes to final design, construction, and the start of revenue service. One element that we hope to decide perhaps within the next couple of years is the delivery method how the project would be delivered. So for example, in Federal Way, it's going to design build where a contractor will come in before final design, the element of final design that Sound Transit usually completes. And that will help us, by determining that sooner, that will help us know exactly what type of documents we need to have ready so the project won't be slowed down while we try to figure out our internal Sound Transit decision making.
All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we will be working with you and the other councils, the Puyallup Tribe, and your communities over the course of the next 4 to 5 years. And I wanted to show this bar chart here and really celebrate the accomplishment that we all collectively have made in really shaving a year off of this first planning phase of work and for the Federal Way Link extension. You can see here Sound Transit's 5 light rail segments, and you can see that KDM/Federal Way Link took 4.3 years, where the other projects took about 5 to 5.5, 5.2 years at best. We collectively were able to shave a year off of this planning phase of work, I think for a lot of reasons. One, that the cities got together, the 4 cities in the Federal Way Link corridor got together early and identified those sticky political issues and were able to come to consensus amongst yourself on a preferred alternative. We were able to do really early and often outreach to your communities and really engage communities deeply in this planning process and reach consensus there as well. And that really helped to drive one preferred alternative that the cities collectively, the communities collectively brought to the Sound Transit Board and thereby shaved a year off of this process. So Federal Way Link is the model now for Sound Transit. We are applying this approach to public engagement, to external engagement across all of our light rail projects. And what that will look like is something like this. So we will be engaging you all, city councils, community members, different interest groups in a variety of ways. We're looking to put together an elected leadership group. This will be elected officials from each of the 4 cities, plus a member of the tribal council, as well as Sound Transit Board members in some discussions. We're looking to put together a stakeholder group that is made up of community members from communities along the corridor that will help advise important aspects of the project. And then we are already working as a staff team with representative staff from each of the cities as well as the Puyallup Tribe who will help to guide technical aspects of this project. And then very importantly, throughout the course of the project, both this phase as well as going forward towards construction, we'll be engaging the public and transit riders as we move towards major milestones and selection of the preferred alternative and station locations. So as far as next steps, as I mentioned, we will be looking for early and often coordination with you. I just wanted to underscore something that Karen said, but I want to say it as well. No final decisions have been made in this project. There have not been decisions made about a location of a maintenance and operations base. There's not been decisions made about exact station locations nor the alignment. Those are all decisions that will be made in conjunction with the cities and the Puyallup Tribe over the course of the next 4 to 5 years. In the 4th quarter of this year, we will come back to you, if you'd like, with an update on the project as we move towards a partnering agreement with you that Karen discussed. In December of this year, also in the 4th quarter, we'll complete the consultant procurement, and the Sound Transit Board will select a consultant to help us support this project. And then in January, we'll begin the technical work. Oh, and I misspoke. In January, we're looking to complete the partnering agreement, but we'd like to come back to you at the end of this year to talk about the progress we've made with your staff towards that end. So with that, we'd be happy to answer questions.
Councilor, are there any questions? Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. Thank you for coming down here today. So this project will cross 2 sub-areas. I'm sure you've had other projects do that. If Pierce County sub-area has more funding than ours, is that ever an issue?
It's not an issue for this project. The plan is that the South King sub-area will fund up to the Pierce King line, and Pierce will fund south of there.
Okay. Will both 99 and I-5 be studied in this?
It's all, yes. Do you want me to just take this? Yeah. Okay. We're learning how to do our dance. You've seen me and Dan do this dance a few times. So, so much like we did 5 years ago with Federal Way Link Extension, we will be looking at alternatives, reasonable alternatives on I-5 or 99, but we'll be starting with the I-5 alignment as a starting point for discussion, and then looking for feedback if there's an interest in 99, and what aspects of 99 that will all be studied over the course of the next 4 to 5 years.
I have 2 more questions. At what stage does the maintenance yard be chosen and developed? Is that developed before the route is started, or?
That's a really good question. So the selection and identification of a preferred alternative for the maintenance facility will be on the same schedule as the identification for the whole corridor, meaning, again, within that 18-month window, we would like to be able to narrow that down to the most reasonable elements to advance. At this particular point, I would love it if it's just one. That makes our job easier. I don't know yet until we get further in if there might be 1 or 2 sites that are carried forward into the environmental process. Similar to the alignment itself, until we get, there might be particular areas where we need to have a couple of design options to carry forward. I just don't know at this particular point. The overall schedule does have, following the environmental phase, does have a need for the maintenance facility to open prior to the operation of the line itself. And that's mainly due to the fact that we need a place. Vehicles don't come right before we open the corridor. We need a place to store, maintain, and then begin testing of service. So the schedule for the facility to open is more 2027, 2028. But the schedule for identifying a preferred alternative is in line with the overall project.
And my last question is, the elected leadership group, what decisions will they be responsible for?
That's also a good question. I think that we're looking for guidance from the elected leadership group as first off to the alignment and station locations. I think Mayor Farrell and Deputy Mayor Burbidge were involved in the Federal Way Link Extension leadership group, and I think as we've discussed this, it will be similar sorts of political and policy discussions that they'll have. So I don't know that Sound Transit is necessarily looking to prescribe decisions, but.
And as Chelsea referenced previously, when we were talking about the alignment, what was going to be south of Highline College, there was considerable discussion and coordination with the South Sound cities. In fact, we regularly had meetings, I believe, at the Des Moines police station or a precinct they had there near their city hall, and the leadership of not just the Sound Transit folks, but from Kent, Des Moines, SeaTac, Burien, Normandy Park, all those partners. And it was the alignment, so to speak, of each one of those for an I-5 alignment, which when we finally testified before the Sound Transit Board was very important, because at the last minute there was a push by certain groups to, regardless of what we thought, put it down Pack Highway. And it was that alignment and that coordination, all those meetings that occurred, that really enabled us to get the alignment that we needed. Because that would have been like a wrecking ball through our city.
So that brings me to another question.
Please.
So because this goes into Pierce County, and Pierce County has a similar group of elected officials like Sound Cities, I would assume that Sound Cities and the Pierce County group will need to be working together pretty closely. Do you facilitate that, or will they need to facilitate that on their own?
Sound Cities, so periodically Sound Transit staff comes to make presentations to the Sound Cities Association. For the purposes of this project, we're looking to form our own independent leadership group of elected officials specific to this project, but we are more than happy to come to the Sound Cities Association or any other elected officials group at any time and talk to them as we kind of work through options together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Councilmember Duclos.
I just want to be clear. With our meeting, I think we clarified this, but I want to make sure that this won't impact anything that we are planning to do with our downtown, because it's going to be down the I-5, so it won't be impacting anything off of 320th.
So For this project, we are starting with a representative alignment along I-5 as a starting point for discussions, and then we will work with the city to determine the exact alignment.
Because we have plans to do things with our downtown that goes along with the growth here in the city and what we're trying to make Federal Way become, or help Federal Way become. And I would hate to have this derail the plans that we're working on. So I just want to make sure that we're working together, but.
Right. I mean, right now, the alignment is to swing, obviously, right where the Wendy's is, and then cross over where the Red Robin is. At that point, from that point forward, moving south, that shouldn't interfere with anything that I'm aware of that we have on the books.
I just want to make sure we make sure of that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we have. That's one of the main reasons. What we did not want to do is have it go down Pack Highway and displace all of those apartments, all of those businesses, all of those employees, and then swing in and potentially take out our brand-new Town Square Park. So,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chelsea, it's great to see you on Federal Way again, and it's great to see your partner here once again, second time, I believe. So be sure to stop by Poverty Bay and other places. Sorry, I always say that. But the question is there any plans? I know you're going to hold community gatherings and areas where people can come together and ask the questions. I imagine it's going to happen again, like you did before. But this is going to affect the south end of the city. Is that right? Because we're going into our south end cities like Milton and other cities going down towards
Yes.
Tacoma, correct?
Oh, you got to do that? Okay. Yes, correct. So we will be connecting geographically the communities between Tacoma and the city of Federal Way. And those include Milton, Fife, and then the city. It also, this is a new opportunity. We will be engaging with the Puyallup Tribe with tracts on the tribal reservation and potentially properties that are owned by the tribe or tribal members. So yes, to your point that we will be coordinating and traversing all of those communities.
Yeah, and I was just really concerned if there's going to be any targeting efforts for the south end of Federal Way.
Oh.
For there to be, because I know there's going to be some sort of developments potentially on the south end of the Federal Way going towards Fife, Milton, and Tacoma. So I wonder if there's going to be, again, I know you're going to have your meeting for everybody, but the question is there going to be a target effort for the south end of Federal Way? Because that place is going to change a little bit with their development.
Sure. So that's a good question, and let me give you an example of the type of outreach we've been doing for the Federal Way Link extension, and I think it's a good model that we'd like to apply here. So in the corridor between Angle Lake and Federal Way Transit Center, it's large. It's highly residential. I mean, there's some commercial centers along I-5, but on either side of I-5, particularly on the west side of I-5, where the Federal Way Link extension comes down from the current terminus at Angle Lake down into Federal Way. There are some residents that will be neighbors of the Federal Way Link project, and there aren't necessarily organized neighborhood groups in that corridor. There are some, and we've communicated with those, but in other areas we have communicated or reached out to individual residents in different neighborhoods that are near the alignment and asked them to, for example, host house parties where they can invite those residents, that household could invite Sound Transit staff to come and talk to their neighbors about the project and get feedback from their neighbors directly about the project. And so I think that's been a tool. I think we've have at least half a dozen to a dozen households that we've done that in with a number of neighbors that have participated in those. And it's been a really, I think, unique tool, outreach tool, and a really effective tool for Sound Transit to talk to people who are near the alignment. And I can imagine that might be a similar tool that we would use here.
all right, Councilmember Kopeng, then Deputy Mayor Burbridge.
Karen and Chelsea, thank you again for coming. I know as soon as you put something on paper, it becomes reality, right? So I know, just to be very clear, the route is not settled. The proposed stations are just placeholders for what the eventual locations will be. But you want to have a South Federal Way station, want to have a 5 station, and then 2 stations in Tacoma, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, as far as the maintenance thing is, or the maintenance
yard, how many acres does that have to be? And I notice it's not represented here at all yet, but how many acres does that site need to be?
Right, so you had a key and I that it's not specifically represented here, and that goes, I think, as an indication of we don't know exactly where, and so to pinpoint one site at this stage would be premature and misleading. So it depends on the total number of vehicles, but we'd be looking as a starting place about 30 acres. So it's a substantial amount of property, and so the trade-offs or the areas we'll have to look along the corridor are where is there land available, how do we access it, what does it mean for operation of the system as a whole, because again, this facility won't be used just to support this line, but points north. So it's something we'll have to take a very close look at, and we will look all along the corridor.
Now, I know in your initial planning document, a site was located
Right.
for the maintenance yard. And can you go into the details of why that particular site was chosen?
Sure.
And how seriously it's being considered?
Sure. We did look at, again, we were looking at, within the ST3 plan, to identify projects to identify costs that we could build a system plan around. And so along this corridor, we looked at locations in Fife, we looked at locations further north and heading into King County. So the representative cost, we ended up picking the one that cost the most to have the most cost available in the plan. And that was located across from the South Federal Way Station, on the other side of I-5 from the station, in what is actually King County area. And we did that again for the dollar amount, knowing that if it was affordable within the plan, we should try to put the most funding to it so we'd have more flexibility when it came to the process of actually determining the location. So beyond that as a placeholder, there isn't there's no decision to place it there. Again, we need to look along the whole corridor, evaluate what's available, what's planned for development, what works best for operations, and the environmental realities of the locations that we'll take a look at.
Well, I think any decision made will be in consultation with the local governments, obviously, and King County in the case where anything is outside of King County. But
right.
The likelihood of having tracks going across the freeway and coming back is it's not very likely, is it?
Well, I don't want to speak specifically yet because we just don't know. We need to do more examination. I would say it's more of a challenge if you need to go across. But a lot of that's just going to come down to what's the trade-offs that I mentioned, what's available, what works best for operations, and what fits best for the system as a whole.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
All right, Deputy Mayor Burbidge, and then Councilmember Selsky.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen and Chelsea, for your presentations and for being here with us and responding to our detailed questions. I have another question related to the maintenance facility. You may not be able to answer this at this time, but I've just to ask for clarification. Would you hope that you would be able to have a decision on the location of that as part of the partnering agreement or not?
No.
No.
We would not look to have a decision for that in January, which is when we would be looking for the partnering agreement. When I mentioned the maintenance facility in regard to the partnering agreement, it's just a recognition that there is that an element of this project will need to include a maintenance facility. We want to be upfront and transparent about the fact that somewhere from Federal Way to Tacoma, we will need to site a facility, because it is. While you think of rail as in stations, I don't always think about the facilities that are needed to maintain them, but it's a reality, and we're going to need to build one. So the partnering agreement will speak to the fact that there will be a need for that. As far as the timing of looking to identify potential locations, that's keyed in with the summer 2019 date that you see here, and identifying the preferred alternative. That's a board decision, but it's one that will be built with participation of the three groups that Chelsea spoke to: stakeholders, elected officials. What am I leaving out? Oh, the technical teams from the jurisdictions. So we would look to have identified either a preferred alternative or alternatives to move forward in the environmental evaluation. So no, at this point, there's nothing about where it is, just the fact that we need one.
Okay. And then one additional question. The BPA transmission lines are obviously a challenge to deal with. Do you have any comments on the process involved with with addressing that?
Yes, so so when you look down the corridor, that is one of the first technical challenge that will emerge for how do we advance this project further south from that point. So I think the Federal Way project is trying to, with the tracks, the final location of their tracks, to set us up in a way that we can continue well. Moving those is going to be a challenge. So we look for ways, we would hope to look for ways that we could go under and avoid having to move them. But that's something that will take a deeper dive. One of the elements that we're hoping to do with our technical consultant to advance, to help us advance decision making, is to take a deeper dive at some of these technical issues, such as that one. Another would be the crossing the Puyallup River to get to Tacoma. So they have a little bit more information at this stage of project development than we normally would, so we can be a little bit more informed about potential outcomes to those very issues.
Okay. Just one more quick one, make it quick. There will be a crossing of 320th, but is that considered to be, that's part of the other project though, isn't it,
Correct.
Already?
Yes, that is the crossing of 320th is part of the
So that'll be
Federal Way Link
complete.
Extension project.
So that's part of the other discussion?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Borselski.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Farrell. And thanks for the presentation. This is pretty exciting. We're really starting to see things now, and I guess maybe light at the end of the tunnel. So pretty exciting. Just a couple questions here. Based on looking at the larger scale map of the whole system, it looks like obviously Sound Transit 3 ends at the Tacoma Dome. If you could put that, yeah, there you go. Sound Transit 3 ends at the Tacoma Dome. Is there any thought or any consideration or long-term planning to extend light rail further than the Tacoma Dome, or is that basically the territory of the Sounder train going further south?
That's a really good question. So what you see here is what's funded and voter approved. Sound Transit really can't build anything without it being voter approved. Having said that, we do have a vision document that's not really constrained by time or money, just those two things. But within that vision document, there is a couple of lines that extend from Tacoma south to DuPont. One is the Sounder line that you see here that would be funded to be built. Another is a high capacity or light rail line. So it's in our vision documents, but at this point we have no authority or any active plans to go there. The only additional element besides what you see here is a study to look at potentially extending rail from Tacoma Dome to Tacoma Mall. It's within the ST3 plan to complete at some point, but it's not an environmental document, meaning it wouldn't have any official standing. It would just be an informative piece for the board to consider at a future date. So the short answer to your question is within our vision document, yes, but active plans, no, as in funded, no.
Okay, got it. That's what I wanted to hear. Great, thank you. Can you tell me or tell us where the next further maintenance facility is to the north of us?
That is in a very similar place as this one will be. It hasn't really been determined. So the light.
I think you're talking about existing maintenance.
Existing, yes.
Oh, sure.
Yes,
It's in the
yes.
city of Seattle.
It's in Seattle.
Forest Street. We are in the process of. There will be one built in Bellevue. We refer to that as the maintenance facility east, and then the only active one is within the city of Seattle.
It's in South Seattle. You've likely seen it if you've driven on I-5 and you're stuck in traffic. Just south of Seattle, kind of near the Rainier Brewery in that area.
Near Georgetown?
Yeah, a little bit. Kind
Georgetown.
of near Georgetown.
Okay. Yeah, and the reason I'm asking these questions is just looking at, I guess, long-term planning and the vision, and just looking at a glance at the map right there, if the system does wind up in DuPont down the road, and I know we're talking way down the road, the center of mass from South Seattle to DuPont, it's somewhere between Federal Way and Fife. I mean, just at a glance. And I guess I'm probably gonna go ahead and say this. I'm not sure we are really interested in taking more Federal Way property for doing something like this, a maintenance facility, as we're going to be taking property for both stations, the Federal Way downtown and the South Station. And of course that's necessary. We want to be part of that system. But again, the center of mass is somewhere in there, and I'd like to say maybe it might be smarter down the road to be in Fife as that center of mass between the South Seattle station and DuPont down the road. Unless there would be potentially another station sited further south, south of Tacoma. So anyway, just want to put that plug in there early on. Does it necessarily, the maintenance facility necessarily have to be located near a transit station, or can it be off-site somewhere?
It does not need to be near a stop, a stop, no. It does need to be near the, you don't want it to be too far away from the line to get vehicles to it, but no, it does not have to be directly at a stop.
Okay. And then when citing the South Federal Way station, and this is kind of taking off on what Councilmember Duclos said about our downtown and the business interruption and the displacement of businesses that we've experienced on downtown, necessary because of the alignment that we know of. When we cite the South Federal Way station, we really want to make sure we're not going to interfere or interrupt or displace businesses down there. There's been talk of this thing, you know, maybe having or interfering with what's going on at Costco or you know, because that is, face it, that is the, you know, population center of South Federal Way, at least in terms of where people will travel to get to a light rail station. So we'll be involved in deciding this, right? Okay, and that's our goal. I know. I guess I'm speaking for myself, but I think I speak on behalf of the council and our businesses and the Chamber of Commerce. We just don't want to move or displace or interfere with businesses that are generating, you know, income for people, jobs for people, and tax revenue for the city as well.
We'll be working very closely with you to cite these stations.
Okay. And then one more thing, and I know this is all about Sound Transit 3. With regard to Sound Transit 2, since you're both here, I just want to make sure we have great discussions about what's going to happen with that surplus Sound Transit property in the downtown area. And definitely want to call for meetings and, again, with our Chamber of Commerce, with our, you know, with all the stakeholders that have to do with this, so that we have a, you know, an opportunity to shape what that's going to look like post-construction. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Duclos.
Well, I do second and third that, last part. I just, regarding the connection down to Tacoma, to me, it would seem that the tide flats would be a really good place for a station, because that's where there's an awful lot of industry. And so you might want to look down there, and there's business property there, there's trucks, and it wouldn't be interrupting or taking land away from cities that are not industrialized. So you might just take a look at that area.
All right. Council, anything else? All right. Now, we do have on the agenda public comment. And do we have any citizen comment? Anybody who would like to address this issue? Okay. I've got one so far, and I see, I see two more, or three more coming. Tracy Hills first.
Hello, Mayor, City Council, and Sound Transit. How are you doing tonight? I like for them to choose the old transit center, go in that way, and then come out on Interstate 5. That'd be an alternative route that I like them to choose. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tracy. Okay, Julie Cleary. Then Suzanne Vargo, and then Diana Noble-Gulliford.
Hi, good evening. My question is, out of four of the sites, only one of them is zoned for industrial, and the other three are zoned residential. So I was wondering how they plan to handle the rezoning of that. Light rail is a public need, like an airport, so not much we can do about it. They could take the property if they want, but a maintenance and operation facility is not considered a public need. And so I think you have a lot of say in where that goes. So that's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Do you guys want to address that now, Chelsea and Karen, before I call? Or should we, why don't we do this? Let's run through the rest of the comments, and then we'll do that. I think that'll be much more cleaner. And Suzanne's ready to go.
I am ready to go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Okay. People say we just come to these meetings and all we do is complain and don't offer solutions. And I would love to say that thank you to the city, but every single week there is another bombshell to investigate and to try to figure out what is going on with our city. Tonight I'd like to address the light rail and the maintenance facility that is planned, their #1 site for the parcel of land just off South 360th Street, South 28th Avenue. This piece of land is zoned residential, as Julie just said. It is a protected waterway of the East Branch of the Hylabos. Gotta talk about it. You know that there's a petroleum hazardous corrosive pipeline that runs right through that, and that's why we didn't have the toxic warehouse on Weyerhaeuser? You're gonna be disturbing a corrosive, aging pipeline that it had no maintenance in 58 years now, and it's in established native wetlands. That's a disaster. That's Whatcom County all over again, so I'd like you to consider that. The East Branch of the Hylabos does run through this piece of property, and it receives its flows from the headwaters at Weyerhaeuser. The piece of land was a landfill back in the 30s and the 40s. Now this is a concern, and I'm questioning King County's approval to put in a residential area so close to the methanol gas. Weekly studies have been conducted since the 60s to ensure the community's safety. Homeowners were actually asked to sign a waiver of knowledge that they knew of the landfill, but this was done after they had purchased their homes. In 1968, a voter's approval for Proposition number 6, a forward thrust parks, $443,000 in 1968 was planned for the park on this property in this residential area that we're going to save the Hylabos. I'd like to know where that money went, what you did with it in its place, and when I'm going to get my park. How is it that the land that is zoned residential, sensitive areas, protected waterways, should have had the money put into it, and nothing for, 50 years? Now, I'm sympathetic to light rail, and I know it needs to happen, but I am perplexed at the attitude of Sound Transit. Everything that has been said by them, from what I hear, is that they will be open to the ideas, but they're basically going to take whatever they want, what serves them best. That is a huge concern. I'd like to once again reiterate that building a maintenance facility on tribal ancient burial grounds, our Catholic cemetery, and the actual homestead of Peter Hylabos, unacceptable, and it cannot happen. So thank you very much.
Okay, so Brian, with regard to those questions, can you research some of that material and provide that to Ms. Vargo? Okay, Diana Noble-Gulliford.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and Sound Transit. I want to express my sincere concern about how the Federal Way link stops at 320th and does not continue on with an identified route throughout our city center. It concerns me a great deal. Number one, for city planning policies, but also we have several major property owners that need to have a decision made here so that they know how to develop their property. In the long run, it affects our city, and it also affects how our downtown is going to develop. Had I known this 6 months ago, I would have probably expressed it sooner, but I just assumed that we were going to go across 320th and go out past Red Robin and so on. But now I'm hearing that the decision is not final yet. And my other concern here is that the southwest area the sub-equity policy that Sound Transit has. And I realize that it's state law, but it seems backwards to me because the need is here in the south end from Tacoma going up through along I-5. It's the most congested area for commuters, and we need to have the Sound Transit now. Bellevue is in the planning station for the East Link, I believe, and I think they're doing 3 stations concurrently. I don't understand why Federal Way can't have a route finalized in our city center all the way through our city center for just 1 station. It just doesn't seem right. And then, last but not least, I'd like to hear an explanation of the difference between an urban center transit station and a suburban transit station, which is, I guess that's the one that's planned on the south part of Federal Way. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Chelsea and Karen, can you please address those questions? And let's address Ms. Goliford's first. Because my understanding is the route for ST2 is, well, actually ST3. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, I'll take them in a certain order, and if I miss one, please come back. So I think the comments that you heard about potential locations for the maintenance space indicate what we were trying to discuss, that a location has not been identified, and more work is needed to be done to identify where it actually will go through a process that will involve the cities, the board, technical staff, and jurisdictions. Zoning, I think, was one of the questions that was raised, and that would be an element we would take a closer look at. What is the current zoning in that location to see what's allowable? And that will be one of the factors, along with others that I mentioned, that will go into evaluating and eventually identifying a location. Might need help with some of the other questions.
Chelsea.
I think I'm sorry, I don't know her name, but the last woman who was up here making.
Diana Noble-Gulliford.
Yes. The last one of the comments that you were just mentioning was whether the alignment through the Federal Way Transit Center is finalized, and it is. So for the Federal Way Link Extension Project, that includes stations at Kent Des Moines near Highline College, South 272nd, and Federal Way Transit Center. The terminus of that line will cross 320th, and there will be a tail track just near the target right there. And Karen mentioned that tail track will be situated so that for the Tacoma Link Extension, Tacoma Dome Link Extension Project, this next project, that track will be pointed in the right direction to get us through the power lines in some way.
Right. And the station will obviously be around where the current Wendy's is, on that west side of 23rd.
Correct. The station at Federal Way Transit Center is on the west side of 23rd, and that area right there will be designed to include the station, an elevated station, plus a bus loop, a relocated bus loop, plus the introduction of new streets consistent with the city's vision for the street network in downtown, which will allow for some surplus property. And that one of you had just mentioned wanting to coordinate very closely, and this is Sound Transit's desire as well, coordinate very closely on how that property is surplused as we move that project forward.
And we've already had several conversations about my concern about, types of housing and that kind of thing, and making sure we've got an adequate sized parking garage there and a police substation in that area.
Yes.
And that, okay.
Yes, and so those are all part of the Federal Way Link Extension project, separate from the Tacoma Dome Link Extension that Karen and I have been here talking about tonight. I think as we move forward and come back to you frequently with presentations both on Federal Way Link and Tacoma Dome Link, there is lots of room for confusion in these two conversations, and to the extent possible that we can keep these projects separate because they are in different phases of development, I think that will be important for all of us, just to be clear on what we're talking about.
Okay. Council, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we've heard from the public, we've heard from council. Anything else before we adjourn? Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. Chelsea, you said something just now that, so when the tracks are done by Target,
Yep.
the alignment to Tacoma will have been decided.
Oh no, I didn't mean to infer that. So when the tracks near Target are complete, we call it the trail track. It allows the trains to turn around. It goes down and comes back. It will be pointed south in a manner that allows us to continue south, but will not impact where the alignment will go.
So if you cannot go under the power lines, then will Sound Transit pay to put the power lines underground?
I just don't think we have done enough analysis to be able to determine anything related to how we cross the power lines yet. But that is, as Karen mentioned, that is one of the first technical questions that we'll need to evaluate. And so we'll be coming back to you with more information over the course of the next several years as we evaluate this further.
Okay, thank you.
Can you, do you have a pointer or anything?
So I bet EJ pulled this up because he would like me to trace with the arrow here where the alignment will go. So I just want to say that as I do this, I am not looking at a map in front of me, and I am not an engineer. So this line that I'm going to trace here is rough. But I would be happy to come back and talk with you with the project director, Dan Abernathy, more about this. So basically, the alignment will come over the roundabout right here and follow 28th Street on the south side of 28th, 317th, sorry, on the south side of 317th, and it turns, EJ, this is the part where I know it less. What sort of angle does it have?
It turns through the old Azteca through here and clips the outside screens of the movie theater and turns basically along here and comes across to the west side of 23rd Ave, and then the new transit center would be right in here. Then the tail track continues across 320th, and this is the area Chelsea was talking about where it essentially becomes the turnaround for the train itself, and there's towers in the parking lot, but then starts hooking to the northeast corner and does not interfere with the mall, but hooks towards the northeast corner of Target. And that's where the BPA lines are, right through this area, and right there, there's the tower, right through here, and come across the parking lot. So that's what Chelsea's talking about with being aimed, or Karen was talking about earlier, being aimed between the two tower spans. So the Federal Way link extension project will end right about where the mouse is here on the south end. And then the Tacoma Dome extension project will start here and go south along whatever route the EIS identifies.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Burbidge?
Thank you. I believe there was another question about a differentiation between suburban and urban stations,
Right.
Station types.
Sure. So in the Sound Transit 3 planning process, when we were looking at areas, we used characterizations for station types. Urban and suburban were one. So as you might anticipate, when we refer to an urban or a downtown station, it's one that is within a downtown area. Typically, there's a street grid in place, which could more easily allow for non-motorized movements. Suburban stations, such as the one at South Federal Way, are ones that would be more characterized by not having as much of a downtown street grid, perhaps have uses that are more frequented by cars, as an example. So one thing that we did within the ST3 planning process and what those station identifications were used for was assigning funds that could be used for non-motorized access that were particular to a station type. So again, if you think about a downtown station where you might have facilities that are more available for walking or biking, there's a certain dollar number attached to improve those areas. In suburban areas, the dollar number was higher because, and again, these are on a typology basis, representative. You would not anticipate to have as much infrastructure available already to allow for those non-motorized movements. So it was used to help distinguish between different types of stations and also to allow for funding to be made available. That's one key difference that between ST3 and ST2. is that we're a fairly young agency, and we're trying to learn as we go and apply from that learning, apply methods to help build station areas that are accessible and inviting to users.
Thank you.
All right, council, any other comments? All right, thank you very much. Great job, you guys. All right, with that, having heard from the public, heard from the council, and heard from Sound Transit, we are adjourned.
So, Mark.